Hi, my name is Damon Lembi and I'm the CEO of Learn It. I hope you enjoy your Coaching for Managers class. If you do, please like and subscribe to my channel. Enjoy your class.
Hi there, and welcome to Learn It's program, Coaching for Managers. My name is Mickey Fitch-Collins, and I'll be walking you through this course we offer live. I have the course structured in a way for you to go through it at your own pace and on your own time, stopping and starting where you need to. I'll be asking you to pause at certain parts, engage in some reflection and some activities to help in your own learning. Today is all about thinking about how you as a manager can engage in informal coaching with those that you work with and to help them accelerate and amplify their performance. It's about helping define and create a coaching culture in your workplace, as well as a coaching mindset for you, as well as asking meaningful questions to help your team solve problems. Again, my name is Mickey Fitch-Collins. I'm an instructor with Learn It. I've spent close to the last 20 years supervising and managing teams and building up my own coaching practice as a manager. I'm very excited to engage in this with you. Very passionate about the topic. So I want to start first with asking you this question that you see on the screen. A question that you're likely to get from people that supervise you, from people that coach you, maybe a question that you've actually asked people that you supervise. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Go ahead and hit that pause button and think on that for a minute. When you're ready, go ahead and hit the play button and we'll continue. So this question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I realize this is a really tough question to answer. You may not know where you see yourself in 5 years, or maybe you know exactly where you see yourself in 5 years. You just don't know how to get there, right? Whether we know or don't know where we see ourselves 5 years from now, what we do know is that life can throw us lots of twists and turns, which can change our direction and our path from what we were originally on. While coaching for a 5-year goal or a 10-year goal or milestones and big goals can be really helpful, coaching individuals to answer this question is not what this course is about. In this course, we aren't talking about things like key performance indicators or OKRs or annual or monthly or quarterly one-on-ones or anything like that. So if we're not talking about that sort of coaching, what exactly are we talking about? We're talking about informal coaching. You may also be wondering, if we're not talking about coaching employees for KPIs and annual performance reviews and all that sort of stuff, then do my employees really need a coach? Rather than coaching for things like KPIs or goal sessions, we're instead talking about daily informal acts of coaching. Daily coaching is couched within the practice of supervision and management, which we'll get into in a little bit here. We're looking for those small moments of opportunity to coach your employees. And if you really excel at this informal coaching, your employees won't even know that you're coaching them. For example, if you're having a conversation with one of your employees and in passing they mention how overwhelmed they are about the things that are on their plate right now, this is your opportunity as a coach to be able to actually individually help them solve their problems. This is the kind of example that's small, it's informal, but it's the small moments we're going to be talking about. And in the face of rapid disruptive change that companies are realizing now, command and control leadership isn't where it's at, right? That's not really the way that companies work anymore. As a result, many organizations are moving towards this coaching style of management or this coaching style of supervision, in which coaches and managers help facilitate problem solving and encourage employees' development by offering and asking questions and promoting growth and development rather than just giving orders and making judgments. This change in practice is helping employees become better problem solvers and more innovative and having renewed energy and commitment to their jobs, which we all know is really important. We'll look more at the benefits of coaching later in the course, though. So what are we exactly going to explore today? We're going to talk about how coaching is becoming integral to the fabric of learning cultures within many organizations. And coaching is a good skill that many good managers can develop and continue to grow over their lifetime. There's 4 main learning goals that we have for the course today. The first one is understanding the benefits of promoting a coaching culture within your organization and team. The second one is, how do we develop the prerequisites for a coaching mindset? Really interesting stuff here. And then we're going to talk about how we can apply a series of questions to any coaching situation and really look at a holistic model. And then fourth is that we're going to learn how to support your employees by knowing best when to tell and when to ask. What's not in this course are two things. One, how to develop a growth mindset, and two, leadership self-efficacy. We cover that in another space. Let's start off first by making sure you understand the difference between managing and coaching. Coaching is, in fact, different than managing. Managing involves things like delegating and assigning tasks, conducting meetings, monitoring progress and performance, and making executive decisions. Don't get me wrong, as a manager, you're still going to have to perform these duties, but I want to provide you with an additional skill set, coaching. Let's review what you have to have in order to add this skill set of coaching into your practice. The nature of coaching involves things like listening, asking questions, supporting growth, holding people accountable. Coaching is future focused. It concentrates on the present and the future. And again, as I've said, it can be formal or informal. Formal would be stuff like scheduled sessions where you're sitting down and you're talking about those things like key performance indicators or annual assessments. Informal coaching is more of that hallway conversation, right? Those opportune moments where you're just having a conversation where you're helping an employee solve a problem. Informal coaching is the type of coaching that we're talking about today. It's common to confuse coaching with some other skill sets and professions. So let's take this one step further and clarify what coaching is not. Coaching isn't things like mentoring, counseling, therapy, or training, okay? It's also not something called sponsoring, right? Sponsoring is when a high-level leader, influential person in the field is helping pave pathways and open doors for people to provide some industry expertise to them. Now that we've looked at the difference between what managing and coaching is and some ideas about what coaching isn't, I certainly want to give you some attention to what coaching is. So what is coaching? So Sir John Whitmore, who's a leading figure in the field, defined skilled coaching as unlocking people's potential to maximize their own performance. I love that quote. If you think about coaching as two concentric circles, right? The inner circle represents your employee's current performance, their comfort zone. The outer circle represents potential, their learning zone. As a manager, as coach, the term I'm going to use here, your job is to help move your employee from that inner circle to the outer circle. Coaching is about finding the right balance of discipline and encouragement, freedom and structure, and help your employees figure out how they dig deep. Now remember, we're not talking about coaching for KPIs. We're talking about the informal daily acts of coaching. It's an ongoing process, right? It's work that all managers should engage in on a regular basis with all of their people all the time. Again, to help this roll up into this larger culture of coaching within their organization. So you may be wondering, well, what sorts of things do fall into this coaching as daily informal acts? I want you to think about that exact question. What sorts of activities could be part of acts of daily informal coaching? And what I want you to do is I want you to actually pause the video and think on that question. What sort of activities could be part of a daily informal coaching practice? So go ahead and hit that pause button. Think about that question, and when you're ready, hit play. So I asked you to think about what kinds of daily informal acts could be considered coaching. Perhaps you came up with things like coaching someone on how to do a particular part of a job versus doing it yourself, right? This takes a little bit more time at the beginning when you're actually walking through something with somebody and helping them figure out what it is that they need to do, but it helps them in the long term because they're figuring out that task. Maybe it's something like teaching an employee how to write a report correctly right from the beginning with all of the details and all of the information, helping them maximize their own potential. Or perhaps it's giving feedback to an employee who's doing a certain task for the first time. Coaching them helps optimize them for maximum performance in the future. Now, I imagine you may be wondering just how much impact is this really going to have on my employees? Let's take a look at some promising statistics. According to the International Coaching Federation from a 2022 Forbes article, there's many benefits to coaching. 80% of the people who received coaching reported an increase of self-confidence. That's huge. 70% reported improved work performance, relationships, and more effective communication skills. And here's another great one for organizations that are starting to bring coaching into their workforces formally. 86% of companies report that they recouped their investment on coaching. Additional benefits of coaching include things like increased productivity and efficiency, building relationships between managers and employees or furthering those relationships, and employees feeling much more supported by their managers. Next, I want us to take some time to individually brainstorm what a good coach does, answering the question, how does a coach help us achieve those benefits? A couple of things I want to share before we move into that individual activity. Research conducted by the International Coaching Federation found that companies with strong coaching cultures experience greater revenue growth related to industry peers. Okay? So many organizations still consider coaching practices as a nice to have, but what they actually find is that revenue actually increases when this coaching culture exists in their organization. It's some pretty good food for thought. Now that we know what coaching is and what coaching isn't, and why coaching is so important, we must ask ourselves, what is it that good coaches do? Think about this. Have you ever had a good coach in your life? Maybe it was on a sports team. Maybe you've had an executive coach. Maybe it was your gym teacher way back in grade school. I want you to think about the question, what do good coaches do? In a moment, I'm going to ask you to grab a piece of paper and a pen or open up a document on your computer and jot some notes down and brainstorm some thoughts around this question. What do good coaches do? And I want you to come up with at least 5 items, okay? So go ahead and pause, and when you're ready, hit that play button again, and we'll continue. So let's take a look at what you wrote down. Were there any themes that came up with your answers? Maybe something about listening, maybe something about building and maintaining trust, asking good questions, empowering you, maybe helping you solve some problems. While you may have come up with some thoughts like that, or perhaps had something a little bit different, it's valuable for us to think about what good coaches do as we're thinking about becoming good coaches ourselves. Thinking about the reflection exercise you just did, answering the question of what do good coaches do, you likely had a variety of answers, which is great because there's actually several different styles of coaching that are all unique in their own different way. There's 4 main styles that fall on a spectrum, and if you're looking at the handout, this is on page 4. The spectrum is between more or less information put in and more or less energy pulled out. More or less information put in is in regards to the amount of information that the coach gives to the coachee. More detail, more direction, more questions. Less information is a bit more hands-off, right? Fewer questions, no direction. More or less energy pulled out refers to the amount of energy you're going to get from your coachee. For example, if you tell your employee what to do, they will fulfill your request, but no further energy comes beyond that, right? So let's take a look at how this balances into the 4 different styles of coaching. The first style of coaching is directive. This is more information put in and less energy pulled out. This normally takes place through telling, right? Everybody knows what to expect here. A manager with an accumulated years of knowledge is willingly sharing this with a junior team member, and that person listens really carefully, hoping to absorb as much information as possible. Because it consists of stating what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. It does unleash little energy in the person being coached. Indeed, it may actually even depress their energy because they're just being told what to do. It also does assume that the boss knows things the recipient of the coaching does not. And that's not always a safe assumption to make in our complex work environments. So an example of this directive style is something like this. Sally, in order to get your work done by the end of the quarter, you're going to need to begin collecting the data this week. You should use this program. Okay? That's the directive style. The second style is laissez-faire. This is less information put in and less energy pulled out. Coaching is not always the answer, right? There may be times where you have team members that are productive and proactive about getting things done, and they don't actually need a lot of management or supervision. This is kind of the phrase of hire good people and get out of the way, right? This is the laissez-faire approach to coaching. For example, we're not saying that every time you interact with an employee that there's going to be an opportunity to coach them. Sometimes you just need to tell them that they're doing a great job and just kind of get out of the way. The third style is non-directive. This is less information put in by the coach and more information pulled out by the coachee. This is built on listening and questioning and withholding judgment. Managers here work to draw wisdom and insight and creativity out of the people that they're coaching, and the goal is helping them resolve and solve problems of their own and building coping skills. It's an approach that can be highly energizing for those being coached, but it doesn't come super naturally to managers, right? Because managers tend to be more comfortable in the telling place, right? For example, a question here or there, and then you go figure out the rest. So a coachee might come to you and say, I'm trying to figure out the best way to collect this data. And the coach might just say, well, what methods have you used in the past? Use that information plus any other information you come across, and that's the method you should use to collect the data. That's it, right? This is where non-directive coaching ends. Not much energy put in and very little pulled out. The last style of coaching I want to review is situational. Now, situational is a balance between directive and non-directive, and it's a sweet spot. It really is actually our goal for today. And again, we're talking about the daily informal acts of coaching. This doesn't need to be monthly, annual, quarterly, planned, anything like that, right? Non-directive is on the scale of less information put in, whereas situational is about more information put in. What distinguishes the two is how you process the information, how deep you dive, right? In situational coaching, you'll have the opportunity to ask more questions to really explore the topic. Therefore, you're putting more energy in and you're able to pull more energy out. For an example, if the coachee comes to you and says, I'm trying to figure out the best method to collect this data, the coach might say, well, what methods have you used in the past? What method are you most comfortable using? Do you feel that you need training on these particular topics to be able to best run the data collection? Listening and walking people through a process and through those questions is where it's at. This is just a short example. Obviously, we're going to get into that more in detail. We live in a world of flux, right? No longer can managers simply command and control. Instead, managers need to reinvent themselves as coaches whose job it is to draw energy and creativity and learning out of the people that they work with. Our ideal balance of doing this is through situational coaching, in which more information is put in and more energy is pulled out. How we coach will be based off the situation, hence the name. What does that mean exactly? So situational is about finding that balance between directive, or telling, and non-directive, which is questioning. Directive coaching comes more naturally to us. It tends to be easier for us to just tell other people what to do. On the other hand, non-directive focuses more on asking questions and listening, and sometimes that can be more challenging for us. Our focus today will be on asking questions, asking a lot of questions actually, and knowing when to jump in and give direction. We're talking about situational coaching that takes place outside of formal coaching sessions. Most often, this happens in brief exchanges, right? When a manager might simply respond to a question that comes from one of their employees. When you're asked a question by one of your employees, you're working on the premise that the employee doesn't always have all of the answers. This is what's going to set you on the right track for situational coaching. I want to share a few examples with you so that you kind of understand this whole vibe of situational coaching. So what if I have an employee who's a really high performer and is considered high potential talent, but there's no job openings in terms of promotions? You know that this person is likely to start looking for other jobs due to the lack of opportunities, but you know that down the road, this person is an absolute keeper and a great fit for your organization, right? It would really benefit you by maintaining them and their talent to the organization. What does that conversation look like? How do you even start having that conversation? How does a good coach start with that conversation? Another situation is this. You have an employee who shows up to work late but continues to produce high quality work. And they almost give themselves permission to be late because they're such a good employee and they're continuing to meet deadlines. You know that your leadership and your status as a manager is at risk. If you allow the behavior to continue, it all of a sudden is going to become an accepted behavior at your organization and your workplace. How do you have that conversation? What do you say? When do you say it? How do you say it? Now, let's look at some foundational attributes and some prerequisites to develop for this mindset of coaching. In our reflections earlier, we thought about several important characteristics to what makes a good coach. Here I want to introduce two foundational attributes to coaching. These requirements are absolutely essential for any manager who wants to implement coaching as part of their practice and their daily interactions with their employees. How you view the other person or the coachee is especially important as you're developing a coaching mindset. You need to see them as people who are capable of solving their own problems, okay? And that people are creative and resourceful individuals, and that they don't need to be fixed, they need to be empowered. Therefore, optimism is our first foundational requirement for coaching. Optimism is really about the belief in the potential of your employee. Your effectiveness as a coach depends in large measure on your belief in human potential. It's your job as a coach to help get the best out of someone. Our second foundational requirement for coaching is trust. Trust is about establishing and maintaining an open relationship so that your employees feel comfortable answering your questions, so that they feel comfortable also not having the right answer or not having any answer at all and just having an open conversation with you. In addition to the foundational requirements of trust and optimism, there's 3 additional prerequisites that are necessary to developing a coaching mindset and practicing authentic coaching. And you'll see these on page 2 of your handout. This is a skill set that embodies a good coach. And the first one is about developing and not dictating, right? The ability to ask good questions is critical for your coaching. You don't want to dictate. You don't want to be giving orders, telling somebody how to do something, telling them how they should fix their problem. Don't get me wrong, there are moments where you're going to need to step in and intercede something when maybe somebody is doing something that is critically wrong or going to produce a critical error. You absolutely want to step in. But being direct and dictated to are 2 separate things. The second piece to this is about supporting and not judging. This is all about empathy, right? Empathy is feeling with, sympathy is feeling for. We're not just talking about empathizing, though. We're talking about perspective taking, being able to understand how someone got to where they are, right? And the third prerequisite is about listening and not telling. And active listening happens in 3 parts. The first is engagement. It's about being present, not multitasking and avoiding interruption, being in the moment. Attunement is the second part. You can think of attunement as deep listening, right? Part of attunement is not just about empathizing with the speaker, but it's also about opening themselves up to the feelings of the speaker. And the third part of that is respect. In a way, the first 2, engagement and attunement, were all about focusing on the speaker, the other person. This step is all about focusing on yourself. It's about being non-judgmental, keeping an open mind, and remembering that the conversation is just that, a conversation, not a competition. Using your active listening skills and letting your employees do most of the talking is absolutely key. It's also important to remember that silence is okay. Silence provides valuable time for people to think and people to respond and formulate answers. As an effective manager, as coach, when you ask questions instead of just providing answers, this supports the employee actually coming up with solutions themselves instead of you dictating to them what needs to be done. To be an effective coach, you must be able to listen to the answers to those questions. So let's take a look at a tool that helps support elevating our listening to go one step further. I want us to take some time to reflect on what we've thought about and what we've learned around foundational attributes to coaching and those prerequisites needed for a coaching mindset. What I want you to do is take a few minutes and respond to these questions. What are 2 ways in which you think you can improve your optimism and trust with your direct reports or with your employees? And then the second thing I want you to do is reflect on those prerequisites that we talked about for a coaching mindset. The developing and not dictating, supporting and not judging, listening and not telling. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about your own self and what are areas that you feel like need the most improvement, and what do you think you're going to do to improve that? So go ahead and hit pause on this. Think about those 2 things, jot some notes down on that piece of paper that you have, and when you're ready to continue, just hit the play button. Okay, so we said that our prerequisites for coaching included developing, not dictating, supporting and not judging, and listening and not telling. As a manager, as coach, your job will be to incorporate these skills as a reflective listener with a series of suggested questions. We're going to get to that series of suggested questions soon, but first I want to provide you with a tool to help you elevate your own listening. It's called OARS. The first part of that, the O, stands for open-ended questions. For example, asking a question, if I was going to manage this really well for you right now, what would I do? We'll provide you with a series of suggested questions that really get after that open-endedness. The second part, A, is about acknowledging, getting permission to say what you're hearing. For example, using the question, can I tell you what I'm hearing? The third part, R, is for reflect, telling them the message that you're getting. For example, using the phrase, well, it sounds like, and then continuing on. If you're receiving mixed messages, pointing out those incongruencies between those things. I hear you saying A, B, and C, but your tone is suggesting D, E, and F. But I'm seeing that and talking about their feelings. And the last part is S, which is summarize. In your own words, repeating back to the coach to confirm your understanding of what's being said and what's being communicated. Using a phrase such as, so what I hear you saying is, and then finishing out your summarization. All right, so we've reviewed 2 foundational requirements to coaching, optimism and trust. And as we've discussed, there's the additional prerequisites for a coaching mindset, things like developing, supporting, and listening. And then I introduced to you OARS, which is the tool that helps us elevate our listening to the highest level. Now what I want to do is introduce to you the situational coaching model, which is a series of suggested questions that are going to help you coach your employee through any daily informal coaching scenario. This 5-step model really boils down to a series of suggested questions. And if you elevate your listening to its highest form, this is where you can help make sense of people's challenges from what you're hearing, from what you're listening, asking meaningful questions, paraphrasing back their story, and then helping them solve their own problems. This is exactly what informal coaching is. Each step in the model is a series of questions that managers can map to. When asking those questions, the key is to not ask closed questions that call for a yes or no answer, such as, did that cause a problem? That's a yes or no question. Instead, you want to ask open ones, like, what effect did that have? Open-ended questions help ensure that we understand what's going on, and it helps to ensure trust and respect, and it helps you help them. So I'm going to provide an overview of each step on the slide here, and then we're going to go into each step a little bit further. So the 5-step situational coaching model, as you see on the slide here, is first about collecting data. Second, we're going to talk about defining the challenge or the goal. Third, we'll talk about describing the current situation. Fourth, we're going to explore future solutions. And then fifth, which I find is most critical, is the check-in. So let's first focus on the first step, collecting data in detail. The first step of the situational coaching model is to collect data. You may be wondering, what do we mean by this? A great coach understands what makes their athletes tick. In the same way, we as managers should understand what makes our employees happy, productive, and feel supported. In many cases, managers don't actually know that their employees are unhappy until after they've left. So let's not have that happen to us. In order to understand our employees and support them and meet their needs, the key here is collecting data. When we're collecting data, it's important to remember that we're approaching this by asking questions and listening. At no point are we telling our employees what to do or selling our ideas and thoughts. You can think of it as ask and listen, don't tell and sell. Think about if you have Facebook, what's the question that is asked at the top of Facebook anytime that you want to make a post? Do you remember what that is? No peeking, no peeking. The question that they ask at the top of Facebook is, what's on your mind? And that's such a great question, right? It, in fact, generates millions of responses every single day on that social media. And the reason why it's such a great question is because it's entirely open-ended. People can't simply respond with a yes or a no. It's not a guided question going towards one direction or another. It provides an opportunity for your employee to really kind of pick and choose their own direction and give you a substantial amount of data within that. Now, this is a question we could use in the workplace to initiate one of those informal coaching questions and conversations. Let's also consider some other questions as well. Other questions you could consider is stuff like, what's going on? How does that make you feel? Who's involved and how do they fit into this situation? And you can always follow up with these questions like, okay, and what else? And what else? Good. What else? When asking what else, it's really important that you make sure that you're actually being silent for them to come back to you with more information. Nod your head, show that you're listening, and help them keep talking so that you're continuing to get more data. Ask what else several times because oftentimes that will actually elicit more details coming to you. For example, you could say, Sally, I noticed that you were really low on energy this morning. What's on your mind? Oh, no. What else? Oh, okay. Wow. What else? Right? So that's a really good way for us to use that what else sort of prompt. The key here is to ask really, really open-ended questions in order to not guide your coachee. You're trying to collect as much data as possible in order to prepare for our next step. And you want to make sure that you're confirming the information that you're getting before you're moving on to step 2. Now that we've collected our data, we need to dive even further with specifics to make sure that we understand the challenge or we understand our coachee's goal. Remember, we're talking about these small informal coaching opportunities, not things that are related to major challenges, performance reviews, KPIs, anything like that. So I have 3 questions that I want to offer to you to help you define the challenge or define the goal. A question like, what's the real issue for you? What's the challenge you're facing? What are you looking to achieve? Now, it may only take you asking one of these questions for you to really understand the challenge or goal. Or you may need to ask all 3 of these, or maybe even a couple additional questions for you to be able to really understand the challenge or goal. I'm providing you with 3 really different questions for you to be able to really focus in and understand that challenge deeply. An example of this is that you could ask your employee, well, what's the real issue for you? And they might come back to you and say, well, I haven't heard from Jane yet about my schedule for next week. And she said I should have heard by now. And I'm really starting to get worried about that. What do you think I should do? So at that point, you're really being able to understand deeply what the issue is for your employee. After you've confirmed that challenge or goal, the coach then moves on to bringing awareness to the current situation. This is about exploring the current situation, uncovering facts, and making sure that feelings are transparent. It's important to focus on what's going on right now, not everything that happened in the past. So some example questions that you could use to explore the current situation would be things like, what do you need from me right now in this moment? Or how can I be helpful here? For example, they might come back with you of saying, I want some solutions. I just need you to listen. I need you to help me generate some ideas. I need some emotional support, maybe something else, right? You could also ask a question like, what thoughts do you have about the potential risks and rewards of this situation? The questions that you see there are general questions for you to have in case you feel like you're getting stuck. At this point in the conversation, you may have enough information to know exactly where you need to go with your employee, right? But you may want to ask some more specific questions. Things like, I'm curious why you waited to turn that report in late. I'm wondering what caused the delay. How come you don't follow the procedure? Can you help me understand why you do it differently? Remember, your job as coach is to help ask questions to figure out how to help the coachee identify possible solutions. The coachee should be the one who's doing the majority of the talking, not you. You're there to listen, you're there to help clear barriers, and you're there to make sure that you have a strong understanding. This is where you're using your OARS skills, your highly effective listening. Now that we've collected our data and we've defined the challenge and we've discussed the current situation, we need to start focusing on future solutions. This step focuses on listing as many viable solutions and options as possible. The coach doesn't offer any feedback or any judgment. At this point, it's just about coming up with all of those ideas and then picking the top few options. Remember, we're still going to be asking really good questions to do this. An example of some questions you could offer are things like, what potential solutions to this problem are you thinking about? What does a good outcome look like here? What barriers have you identified that could impact those solutions? Here, the coach is asking questions to explore more and more options rather than leading the coachee to one or two specific solutions. Ultimately, we're exploring future solutions, but we want to be able to provide the coachee the opportunity to answer the question, what will you do and by when? Here's when the coach nails down actions and makes sure that there's some accountability. When we're exploring these future solutions, it's important to avoid a couple of things. The first one is the first solution bias. You've probably heard of this before. It's one of the most commonly experienced biases, this first solution bias. And this is where we're much more likely to pick the first solution that comes to us and just say, sounds good, let's do it. We need to be really careful to not just grab onto the first solution. The second one is that we need to avoid the advice trap. You already know as a manager that you can give advice, right? This is where we get into that directive or telling place. But today what we're trying to do is to not be in a place of giving advice. Advice suggests that people can't figure things out themselves, and we know that our coachees can solve their own problems. The other bias that we want to avoid is the action bias. And this is the tendency to just favor action, whatever it might be, over inaction. And sometimes we just feel compelled to act, even if there's no evidence that it's actually going to lead us to a better outcome. And lastly, we want to avoid what's called the sunk cost fallacy. This is when we're unwilling to abandon an idea or a course of action because we've put time into it, even though we know abandoning that idea would be better in the future. Now that we've explored future solutions and determined what the coachee will do and by when, we need to make sure that we're holding our coachee accountable. We can do this through checking in. Our goal with the check-in is to monitor performance over time. When you're coaching someone, you're able to provide a pretty unique perspective of their performance over time, and you can do so by engaging in meaningful dialogue over things like goals, strengths, weaknesses, areas for improvement, and all of that is without the pressure and the formality of a performance review. You can offer honest feedback, you can help ask questions for them to identify future next steps, give them support, and give them the occasional kick in the pants that they might need. Now, our focus for this module was on informal coaching. And while yes, you have your regular check-ins with your coachee, maybe a one-on-one meeting, whatever that looks like, you can check in with them informally too. In fact, you can do things like checking in over a Teams or a Slack message, over email, chat. The next time you run into them, just asking them, hey, how is that thing going that we talked about, right? Some example questions that you could ask are things like, hey, how did that go? What would you do differently next time? How could I support you in this? And if you decide to actually hold a one-on-one meeting with your employee to do some of this coaching, here's a couple of tips that I want to offer to you. Again, we want to be positive and we want to be future focused. We want to focus on development. And those one-on-ones should really be tailored towards focusing on the growth and the development of the employee and helping them reach the personal and professional goals that they've outlined. Holding those one-on-one meetings frequently ensures that expectations about performance are being met, but also that that person is being able to solve their own problems and move themselves along on the trajectory that they want to be. All of this improves overall communication, trust, and performance. What I'd like you to do now is, after I explain the directions, is pause and do what I call a reflective practice. I want you to think about one of your employees and an issue or a problem that they recently came to you with. And what I want you to do is think through the 5 steps of the practice that we just talked through. And I want you to write down some questions that you'd ask that person related to each one of the steps. Kind of thinking about if you could go back and do that whole conversation again, how would you go through each one of the 5 steps? I'd actually even encourage you to say those questions out loud to find your own language and find your own words for how you would actually ask those questions of your employee. So when you're ready, go ahead and pause the recording and start that reflective practice, thinking about a situation that your employee recently brought to you and what questions you would ask at each step of the way in the situational coaching model. When you're ready, pause, work on this activity, and then when you're ready, hit play again and come back. Let's zoom back out to our 4 styles of coaching. Again, our focus for today was on situational coaching, particularly in these informal coaching sessions. With situational coaching, I had mentioned that this is a balance between non-directive and directive. Directive includes things that are mostly telling, and it's an easier concept for people, things that come more naturally. Non-directive includes questioning, but with less energy put in, maybe a question here or there, and then you let your employee figure out the rest. We focused on the OARS model and a series of questions for situational coaching. However, we also talked about situational coaching being a balance of the two. And so, how exactly do we incorporate directive coaching? Is there actually an opportunity when we actually need to do things like telling? Let's take a look. Sometimes we might only get through the first 1 or 2 steps. Other times there might be an emergency and you may need to coach through telling, right? And telling the employee what to do. So let's take a look at a couple of different scenarios of when it would be most effective to ask versus tell. So when do we ask? We ask questions when there's multiple potential solutions to the goal or the problem, and when the coach is likely to make fewer mistakes. When you have time for further conversations and check-ins, you have a little bit more flexibility, and when trial and error is actually going to enhance brainstorming and collaboration. And most importantly, you ask questions when you can support the employee through key decision-making. Now, on the flip side of that, let's take a look at telling. You want to tell your employee what to do when your coachee legitimately doesn't know what the answer is. Like if they don't know how to do a process, you need to tell them. You also need to tell people when the coachee is making mistakes. You might need to tell people the answer or tell people the solution when you need a quick outcome, when things are time sensitive. And you may also need to tell when a decisive action or your authority is needed, or perhaps when there's emergency. Now that we're familiar with situational coaching and we know how to incorporate the OARS model to be a better and more effective listener and ask those series of suggested questions, and we know when to ask and when to tell, let's zoom out even further and make sure that we have the bigger picture and we can answer the question, how do I incorporate situational coaching into my everyday workday? There's a couple of different ways you can do this. The first is coaching through a performance opportunity. And this could be when you as a manager see that the employee is doing well, but they could actually be doing better. So this is an opportunity for you to bring all of those great questions to bear in your coaching conversations. The second is coaching for the future. Now, this could be actually initiated by your employee or perhaps by you, but it's having a conversation about the future and helping your employee understand and ask questions about what lies in the future for them, testing ideas they have, talking about career paths, talking about things like developing confidence and competence. Talking with your employee about their idea about what is their next role at the company, how do the way they want to take on new responsibilities or grow specific skills. And the third way is coaching for support. So this is just asking questions of your employees like, how are you? How's things in your life on a scale of 1 to 10? How's your stress level? And then listening to the employee's responses and asking those series of suggested questions that we went through before and talking through the challenges and helping them come up with solutions. Here are some common problems coaches might face. And let's take a look at each one of these and I'll offer some ways in which we can solve for these problems. The first is sometimes you might get the answer of, I don't know. to some of the questions that you ask. Or coaches might give you really short answers or hesitate or not be totally transparent. When you encounter this, you really need to evaluate your relationship with your coachee. This could be a sign of lack of trust or lack of comfort that the employee has with you. And so you really need to think about determining ways in which you can build up that relationship and build up the trust so that they do feel more comfortable answering those questions. The second problem you may encounter is coaches having trouble getting to the point, right? So make sure that you're being clear and concise in the communication that you're offering back to your coachee. Prepare in advance what it is that you want to say, what questions that you want to ask, so that you're not rambling on and on. The third is that maybe there's going to be too much of a focus on the past or lengthy storytelling. Again, coaching is all about the present and the future. And so we need to make sure that we're not spending too much time in the past. Conversely, we also don't want to be too futuristic because that sometimes can move us away from the present and solving the present problems and issues that are right in front of us. Have the confidence in the conversation to provide a little bit of nudges to make sure the conversation is in the right place. The last one is that coachees might be big on ideas but short on action. And this is where you want to focus in on step 5, which is the check-in, and focusing in on accountability in that situational coaching model. And you want to discuss the steps of accountability, timeframes by which people are going to get things done, what action they're going to take, and what resources they need. We've come to the end of our journey for today, but I want to leave you with this quote. Bill Campbell, who was CEO at Intuit and an influential coach to people like Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, and many other people, said, "Coaching is the best way to mold effective people into powerful teams." And we know that powerful teams win in business, sports, and other places. So our takeaway today, our focus was on situational coaching opportunities with our employees. It was focused mostly on these individual one-on-one relationships. The point here is to zoom out further, how coaching can impact individuals, but also can impact our teams and how it can impact the culture of our entire organization. So let's take a look at our key takeaways from today's session. The first one is incorporating that OARS model to elevate our listening skills to their highest form. The second is about applying those series of suggested questions that I gave you throughout the 5 steps to any coaching situation that you're in. And then the third one is to recognize when you need to ask questions and recognize situations in which you need to tell in order to best support your employee. I want to thank you for watching and learning and engaging with my session today, Coaching for Managers. Again, my name is Mickey Fitch Collins, and from all of the team of us at Learn It, I wish you all of the best with your coaching practice into the future. Have a great day.